This is a story about names that were never written on statues. About boys who left villages and factories and never returned. About the women who bound wounds and sent letters, whose hands held the last breath of strangers. About the leaders whose maps could not measure loss and the commanders whose medals could not silence the screams. They called it the Great War. At the time, the name felt correct, the greatest known to that world. But greatness was the wrong word. What followed was not glory, but a reckoning, a tearing open of the modern age, a testing of what it meant to be human when machines learned to kill by the millions. This film is not a map of battles, nor a ledger of strategies. It is a mosaic of human smallness and stubbornness in the face of machine-made destruction. Here, we will not only measure dates and fronts, we will trace heartbeat by heartbeat, letter by letter, the slow unraveling of lives. We will follow a captain from England, a general from Germany, and a nurse from the Russian provinces, not as famous names, but as conduits through which a continent's sorrow becomes personal. Through them we will see the decisions, the small mercies, the impossible choices. Through them we will meet the living and the dead. War is a teacher with no mercy. It reveals truths most of us would rather not know. It makes saints of the ordinary and monsters of the refined. It invents new languages of grief, names for wounds, for dust, for the ways men vanish. And when the guns finally fall silent, the echoes remain. This is the story of those echoes, not to glorify, not to excuse, but to listen, to the letters, the boot prints, the silence between shells, to understand what it cost to cross the threshold of the modern age. Listen then, and remember, Europe, 1914. A continent pulsing with confidence, gilded cities, booming factories, empires stretching across the world. The air is thick with invention, ambition, and arrogance. But beneath the grandeur lies tension, a web of alliances and rivalries tightening with each passing day. The stage is set for the greatest catastrophe humanity has yet known. They called it the Great War, a name chosen before they could grasp its meaning. It would consume an entire generation. It would change the very fabric of civilization. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo. A car moves slowly through the crowded streets. Inside, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie. A spark awaits them in the crowd. A pistol fires. 2 lives end, and the world begins to unravel. The murder of a prince becomes the excuse empires have been waiting for. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia. Germany promises support. Russia mobilizes to defend the Slavs. France stands with its ally. Britain watches, uncertain, yet already feeling the pull of history's tide. In the great capitals, telegrams race like veins of lightning. Ultimatums are delivered. Deadlines expire. Old men in gilded rooms make decisions that will send millions of young men into mud and fire. July 28th, Austria declares war on Serbia. August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. Within days, Europe is in flames. The guns of August begin their song. Across the continent, the drums of patriotism echo. In London, crowds cheer as young men enlist. They promise to be home by Christmas. In Berlin, parades fill the streets, flowers thrown at the boots of soldiers who do not yet understand the price of glory. In Paris, church bells ring, and mothers weep quietly in the corners of crowded stations. No one knows that this war will last 4 years. No one knows that it will shatter everything they believe in. By September, the great German armies sweep through Belgium, a neutral land caught in the storm. The British Expeditionary Force meets them at Mons, holding the line with courage and disbelief. The Battle of the Marne halts the German advance. But victory does not come. Instead, both sides dig in. The trenches are born. From the North Sea to Switzerland, a scar cuts across Europe. 1,000 kilometers of earth turned into hell. Men live like moles, buried in the ground, surrounded by rats, lice, and fear. The air smells of decay and gunpowder. The sound of artillery becomes the heartbeat of the world. A soldier writes home, "The world has gone mad. The sky falls every day, but no letter can capture the truth. The endless rain, the sucking mud, the screams that vanish into the night." Far from the front lines, hospitals overflow. Women who once studied poetry now dress wounds and hold dying hands. Nurses like Elena Petrova, a Russian volunteer, learn to numb themselves, to sew skin, to amputate limbs, to write final letters for men they've known only hours. They are the quiet heroes, the ones who rebuild what the guns destroy. In grand war rooms, maps stretch across tables. Lines are drawn, erased, redrawn. Generals believe they can still win by courage alone. But courage is no match for machine guns, gas shells, and industrial slaughter. General Dietrich Weber, a man of discipline and faith in the German cause, begins to doubt the meaning of his orders. He sees his soldiers, boys barely out of school, vanish in the fog. In London, Captain Arthur Hensley prepares to lead his men to the front. He believes in honor, in empire, in duty. But deep down he wonders, can any war be worth this? By the winter of 1914, the world has changed forever. The first trenches freeze into place. The dead lie unburied, trapped between lines of wire. The sky itself seems tired of the killing. Yet on a cold Christmas Eve, something extraordinary happens. Across the front, soldiers raise lanterns above the parapets. They sing the same carols, in different tongues. Guns fall silent. Men climb out of the trenches, shaking hands with those they were told to hate. For one brief night, humanity remembers itself. Then, as dawn breaks, the orders return. Back to your posts. The war resumes. The year 1914 ends not with victory, but with exhaustion. Empires stand firm in their pride, but the earth beneath them is soaked in blood. A new kind of war has been born, one that devours all who touch it. From the gilded halls of Vienna to the frozen fields of Flanders, the spark that began in Sarajevo now burns across the world. And this is only the beginning. The year 1915 dawns under a sky already tired of light. The war that was supposed to end by Christmas has rooted itself in the soil. Men live underground now, in narrow, filthy corridors carved by fear and survival. Europe has become a labyrinth of trenches. The world above them, no longer a home, but a graveyard waiting to be filled. In northern France, the lines hardly move. The Western Front has frozen. 1,000 kilometers of mud and misery. Trench life is not life at all. It is existence reduced to instinct. Men sleep beside corpses. They wake to the rattle of rats the size of cats, to the sting of cold, to the stink of decay that never fades. They count days not by the sun, but by the rhythm of bombardments. The letters home speak of bravery, of faith, but behind the ink another truth bleeds. We are ghosts who have not yet died. The generals have learned that this is not a war of movement, but of annihilation. The guns rule now. Each day, hundreds of thousands of shells fall across the front, reshaping the land, swallowing towns whole. When the smoke clears, there is no victory. Only another crater, another line redrawn in the mud. Men measure survival by seconds. They learn to recognize the pitch of a shell by ear, the whine of approach, the sudden silence before impact. Those who live do not cheer. They simply breathe and wait for the next round. April 22nd, 1915, Ypres. The wind shifts and a new weapon makes its debut. Greenish clouds roll across the trenches, hugging the ground like fog. Men think it's smoke, until they feel their lungs burning. Chlorine gas, silent, unseen, unstoppable. Thousands die in minutes, their hands clutching at throats that will never draw clean air again. War has entered its industrial age. The line between science and savagery dissolves. Far behind the lines, in a converted monastery near Verdun, Elena Petrova writes by candlelight. Her uniform is stiff with dried blood, her hands raw from scrubbing. Each night she lists the names of the men who will not see the morning. The list grows longer than the prayer she whispers after it. She has learned to amputate without trembling, to comfort without promising life. But every so often a boy clutches her sleeve, whispering for his mother in a language she does not know, and she feels the crack inside herself widen. In her exhaustion, she begins to believe that mercy is the only weapon left. July 1st, 1916. The Somme. Dawn rises over the fields of Picardy. The British Army prepares its greatest offensive. For a week, the guns have thundered without rest. Commanders believe nothing could have survived the barrage. But when the whistles blow and the soldiers climb from the trenches, they walk into an untouched hell. Machine guns cut through them like wheat. In a single day, 60,000 British soldiers fall. The bloodiest day in their nation's history. The survivors crawl back through the mud, broken, disbelieving. Captain Arthur Hensley is among them. He carries orders that no longer make sense. He carries the memory of faces already gone. He begins to understand that courage here is not the will to fight, but the will to return again tomorrow. Across the lines, General Dietrich Weber surveys the same battlefield from the opposite side. His men, too, are dying by the thousands, held in place by his own commands. He reads the casualty lists at night, the ink smearing under his trembling hand. He has begun to question not the cause, but the method. A war that devours its children while leaders speak of honor. He writes in his journal, "We are winning nothing. We are only teaching the earth how to swallow us faster." For 10 months, Verdun becomes the symbol of endurance. The French hold, the Germans attack. Both sides bleed the same color. 300,000 men die for a few square kilometers of rubble. The land itself becomes haunted, so churned by shells that the dead cannot be found, only sensed. Verdun is no longer a place. It is a wound. Amid the horror, small mercies survive. A German medic drags a wounded enemy to safety under the Red Cross flag. A British soldier risks court-martial to share water with a dying prisoner. Elena Petrova, S Hospital, receives supplies from both sides through neutral channels. Proof that compassion can slip through cracks even in total war. These moments are not victories. They are reminders that the human heart resists extinction. In the east, entire nations tremble. The Russian front stretches across frozen plains. Supply lines collapse and revolution brews in whispers. The Ottoman Empire burns in desert campaigns. In the skies, fragile biplanes begin to duel above the clouds. The new knights of a mechanical age. The war has become global and unstoppable. Factories work day and night. Women fill the roles of absent men, forging shells that will kill someone's son. Economies reshape themselves around destruction. What began as patriotism now becomes necessity. Survival through endless production. In villages across Europe, the church bells ring less often. There are no weddings, only funerals. Entire generations vanish into the smoke. By the end of 1916, both sides are exhausted, yet neither yields. The ground itself seems alive, soaked in rain, in oil, in blood. The sky carries the echo of every shell, every scream, every unanswered prayer. The soldiers no longer ask why. They ask only when will it end. The answer is still far away. As snow begins to fall across the trenches, the world holds its breath, waiting for a dawn that refuses to come. By 1916, the war had become a creature of iron. What began with rifles and horses now marches on treads and turbines. The soil of Europe vibrates with the heartbeat of machines, the new gods of death. Above the trenches, a new battlefield opens. Canvas-winged aircraft circle like predatory birds, fragile frames of wood and wire. Men who once looked up to stars now look for enemies. Dogfights carve looping patterns across the clouds. spirals of smoke marking both triumph and oblivion. The pilot's life expectancy? 3 weeks. They write their wills on postcards and keep them in breast pockets. In the wreckage of one fallen plane, a photograph of a fiancée is found, unburned. Her smile survives what he could not. September 1916, the British unleash a secret weapon on the Somme. Lumbering across the mud come steel boxes belching smoke. Tanks, they call them. The soldiers stare in disbelief. Some cheer. Others whisper that monsters have entered the war. The tanks crawl forward, crushing wire, shuddering under shell fire, their crews half suffocated by fumes. For the first time, man rides into battle encased in metal. It is the birth of modern warfare, and the death of old courage. In command tents, maps glow beneath lanterns. Lines are drawn, erased, redrawn, the ritual of a war that consumes paper and blood in equal measure. General Dietrich Weber studies those lines each night. He no longer prays for victory, only for reason. Every push forward demands another 10,000 lives. He wonders if leadership means strategy, or sacrifice measured in heartbeats. In his private journal he writes, "The more precise our plans become, the less human they feel." Captain Arthur Hensley, once proud and certain, now walks through trenches that smell of iron and rain. His uniform is torn, his voice hoarse from command. He has learned that bravery is quieter than he imagined. A man handing another a cigarette before an assault, a hand steadying a trembling shoulder. At dusk he writes by flickering candlelight, "We advance tomorrow." The men joke to hide the shaking. If we fail, the earth will take us. If we succeed, it will still take someone else. Elena Petrova's hospital has moved closer to the front. The walls tremble with every distant explosion. The wounded arrive faster than names can be recorded. She has learned to stop counting. Her white apron is no longer white. She teaches herself to see not the faces of the dying, but the fragments of the living. A pulse beneath her fingers, a whisper that says thank you. The small miracle of survival. Each night she walks the ward alone, whispering to the sleeping, "You are still here. That is enough." By the summer of 1917, the armies are rotting from within. Whole divisions refuse to attack. Letters home speak of endless mud, of lies, of hope that no longer exists. In France, soldiers mutiny, not out of cowardice, but exhaustion. They are promised rest, but rest never comes. In Germany, rations shrink. Hunger gnaws at the heart of the empire. In Russia, revolution brews like thunder over the snow. The old world trembles, its pillars cracking beneath the weight of endless war. Far from the trenches, the ocean becomes another graveyard. Submarines prowl the depths, unseen killers of steel and silence. Merchant ships vanish without warning. One moment sunlight on waves, the next black water and screams. Each sinking brings the neutral world closer to fury. Across the Atlantic, America watches, patient but restless. Its entry will soon tilt the scales. 1917 is the year the war consumes everything. Every factory, every farm, every family becomes part of the front. Children collect scrap metal. Mothers drive ambulances. The boundary between soldier and civilian dissolves. Nations begin to understand. There is no outside anymore. The world itself is the battlefield. In the lull between bombardments, soldiers hear sounds that are not shells. Murmurs in the wind, whispers from no man's land. Some say it's the spirits of the fallen. Others say it's only the echo of trauma replaying in the earth. At night, flares rise like artificial stars, and the battlefield glows a ghostly white. The living move like shadows among the dead. Weber begins to bend orders, ever so slightly. He spares villages, delays attacks, sends false reports to save men. He knows discovery means execution, but conscience demands rebellion. On the other side, Hensley orders the evacuation of wounded enemies during a truce window, defying command to leave them behind. Eleanor, somewhere between their lines, tends to both sides alike, her loyalty belonging only to the human heartbeat. 3 lives moving separately, yet driven by the same invisible thread, the refusal to become what the war demands. By the winter of 1917, the war has devoured reason itself. The machines have learned their purpose too well. They no longer need belief, only fuel. Empires stand hollow, their people starving, their soldiers numb. And still the guns do not stop, but in the cracks of despair, something fragile begins to stir. A question whispered in the mud. If this is civilization, what comes after it? The camera lingers on the horizon, where smoke and dawn mix in equal measure. Somewhere beyond that light, a new power gathers, the United States preparing to enter the storm. The war is no longer young. Every army bleeds the same color. Every general carries ghosts on his shoulders. The maps have changed, but the meaning has not. And yet, beyond the gunfire, the world begins to shift. Across the Atlantic, outrage stirs. Unrestricted submarine warfare has dragged neutral ships into the depths. The sinking of the Lusitania still haunts headlines. And then, a telegram. Intercepted, decoded, promising Mexico the lands of the American West if it will join Germany's side. April 1917. The United States declares war. Factories roar to life, banners unfurl, and young men swarm recruitment stations. They come not for empire or vengeance, but for an ideal, that somewhere beyond the ruins, justice still exists. Ships cross the ocean, heavy with supplies and songs. They sail toward a continent that has forgotten how to sing. While new armies sail toward Europe, an old empire collapses. In Petrograd, the streets erupt. Hunger, rage, exhaustion exploding into revolution. The Tsar abdicates. The soldiers of Russia lower their flags and return home to a nation at war with itself. For Elena Petrova, the nurse who has patched the wounded since the first days, the change is both liberation and loss. Hospitals are abandoned. Trains packed with refugees drift toward the Urals. She continues her work alone, tending to anyone left breathing. Soldier, civilian, stranger. Her faith no longer belongs to any nation, only to the act of saving what remains human. Freed from the Eastern Front, Germany throws its full weight westward. The spring of 1918 brings a final gamble. The Kaiserschlacht, the Emperor's battle. Millions of shells thunder at once. The ground quakes like a living thing. General Dietrich Weber commands one sector of the advance. He watches his men surge forward, breaking the stalemate at last, but at a cost measured in screams. Every meter gained feels heavier than the last. He knows victory here is not triumph. It is postponement of collapse. His letters home go unanswered. His conscience, louder than ever. Above them, the sky turns metallic. Squadrons of fighters duel in burning spirals. The aces are worshipped like heroes. Their deaths printed in newspapers like myth. But for each name remembered, 100 vanish unrecorded. The air becomes a second trench, boundless but no less lethal. On the British line, Captain Arthur Hensley marches through the wreckage of villages that once had names. He has stopped believing in final victories. Yet he still leads, because his men still follow. Their boots squelch through mud mixed with ash. They no longer salute. They simply nod, wordless agreements among survivors. At night, he watches flares rise over no man's land and writes in his notebook, "If there is a heaven, it must be quiet." By mid-1918, the German offensive slows. Their armies are starving. Their railways splinter. America's fresh divisions arrive. Young faces, bright eyes, unaccustomed to horror. They march through French villages where only rubble remains, singing to keep the fear away. The Allies counterattack. The line begins to move, eastward finally. But every victory feels hollow. Each kilometer retaken reveals another cemetery. Weber's troops are ordered to hold ground that no longer exists. He stands among the ruins of a church, the altar cracked by shells. He whispers the prayer he once mocked. "Deliver us from evil." Elena tends to both German and French wounded in a neutral zone. Her field tent has become a sanctuary. Around her, men from opposite sides share silence. No language needed. Arthur guides his dwindling unit through the Meuse-Argonne forest. He moves like a man walking through memory, aware that every step could be the last. Autumn 1918. The thunder lessens, but the killing does not. The Allied advance drives toward the Rhine. The Central Powers crumble within. In the distance, cities riot for bread, and monarchies fall like rotten trees. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns finally stop. For a heartbeat, the world forgets how to move. The silence is unbearable, heavier than the noise it replaces. 9 million soldiers dead. More than 20 million wounded. Civilians erased by famine, by disease, by the indifferent machinery of war. Maps will be redrawn, treaties signed, leaders praised and blamed. But beneath the paper, the soil keeps its secrets. Bones, medals, and unanswered letters. Arthur Hensley walks through a field of poppies growing where his comrades fell. Elena Petrova boards a hospital train heading east, her hands still shaking. General Weber awaits surrender orders in silence, staring at a photograph of his family. They have survived the war, but not untouched. The war is over, but the echo remains. It hums in the engines of the next generation, in the roar of new machines being built from the same blueprints of destruction. It lives in every monument that forgets the names of those who dug the trenches, who sewed the wounds, who disobeyed orders to show mercy. The world has changed forever, yet the lessons wait, unheard, beneath the mud. The camera pulls back. Endless rows of crosses, a gray horizon, a single bird rising into pale light. The guns have fallen silent. The 11th hour has passed, and for the first time in 4 years, the world breathes. Uncertain, wounded, and forever changed. The war to end all wars has ended, but there is no celebration, only disbelief, a numb quiet that spreads across battlefields once alive with fire. Men emerge from trenches as though from graves, blinking into daylight. Some weep, some kneel. Others simply stare, as if afraid that the silence might shatter. Corpses are buried in haste. Flags are lowered without ceremony. Victory feels like a rumor, fragile, unbelievable. Across Europe, soldiers begin the long walk home. Trains filled with ghosts glide through scorched valleys. Every town greets its survivors like miracles, and its dead like memories too painful to name. Captain Arthur Hensley returns to England a different man. His uniform hangs loose. His medals feel heavier than his body. He visits the families of his fallen men, one by one. Each knock on a door carries 1,000 unsent letters. He writes in his journal, "The war is over, but the world feels quieter, only because so many voices are gone." In the East, Elena Petrova rides a train through a country reborn and broken. The Russian Revolution has swept away thrones, but not suffering. She works among refugees and orphans, moving from city to city, carrying her small medical kit like a relic of faith. For her, healing is rebellion, a refusal to let destruction have the final word. She does not speak of politics or borders anymore. Only survival. Only mercy. When asked why she continues, she answers softly, "Because someone must remember how to care." In Germany, General Dietrich Weber signs the orders of surrender with a trembling hand. The empire he served collapses overnight. He watches soldiers remove their insignias. Flags burn to prevent humiliation. But within him, a new understanding grows, bitter and human. He knows that wars are not won or lost on maps, but in the hearts of those who must carry them afterward. In a letter he never sends, he writes, "History will call us monsters. Perhaps it is right, but I have seen monsters weeping over the dead." 1919, the Treaty of Versailles. In gilded halls, the victors carve new nations out of old empires. Lines drawn in ink will bleed for decades to come. Europe smiles for the cameras, diplomats shaking hands beneath chandeliers, while outside, widows and orphans beg in the cold. A new world is born, but not in peace, only in pause. Writers, poets, and painters return from the front with shattered illusions. They tell the truth that governments will not, of men turned to numbers, of courage buried beneath politics. Art becomes a weapon now, not to glorify, but to remember. A rebellion of memory against forgetting. Elena stands in a small cemetery outside Warsaw. Crosses stretch into the distance, unmarked, uncounted. She plants a single wildflower between them and whispers a name she will never know. Behind her, the sky clears. For the first time in years, sunlight feels warm. Arthur Hensley visits France once more, years later. The trenches are gone, swallowed by grass and time. He kneels where his men once stood and presses his hand into the earth. "You're still here," he murmurs, and somehow in the silence, he knows they are. Weber lives quietly, teaching history in a small school. He never wears his uniform again. His students know him only as a man who pauses too long before speaking of courage. One day he tells them, "True victory is not in conquest, but in compassion. Remember that when they tell you otherwise." From the ashes of war, nations rise and promises fade. But within every survivor burns a small, unspoken oath that their suffering will mean something, that their fallen will not vanish into statistics, that the world will remember. The poppies bloom each spring, red as blood, bright as hope. The Great War ended in 1918, but its echo shaped every century that followed. It whispered through the rise of new powers, the birth of another, even greater war, and the quiet prayers of those who swore, "Never again." Yet every generation must choose to listen or to forget, because history does not vanish when the guns stop. It sleeps, waiting to be remembered. The faces of Arthur, Elena, and Weber fade into a sea of nameless soldiers. Men and women who gave everything and received only silence in return. This was their story, not of nations, but of souls, not of victory, but of endurance. And though the trenches are gone, their echoes remain, in the wind, in the earth, in us. The screen fades to black. Only the sound of distant wind remains.